So, this is the media review for Hokum and Hex issues 6 through 9. And boy, am I glad that's over too. You know, I don't know if the book started off with a different creative team, if they saw things coming down the line, what it was. But these books must have been canceled fairly quickly, because books 6 through 9 dealt with the counterpart of Trip. Trip being Godkin Straight's champion. And I'll warn you guys ahead of time, loads of spoilers. I mean, it's a damn near a 30-year-old book at this point. So, you know, I think I'm okay to spoil it. But while I'm at it, I might as well also shill. So check my Subscribestar, my PayPal, all that stuff. I am working on a merch store still. It's being a bit of a challenge. If you're interested, do come check me out on Discordant Dragons tonight with Yiz the Eunuch. That'll be on the Rumble channel. I'll put a link in the description. Of course, I didn't bring a pen with me, so I have to write that down on pencil. Just 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. But if I don't write these notes, I'll forget. Anyway. Speaking of forgettable, this is the third time in a week I have had to reread these books in order to do this video. And it's currently Monday. I'm now in a time crunch, but good God, it better be worth it. Just 1 second, let me check the time. Yeah, I've got about an hour and 15 minutes before this is going to have to be live. We'll see how it goes. But as I said, once I finish this, then the next step is to do a reading of a short story that appears at the end of Hyperkind Unleashed #1. That'll be out on Wednesday. And I will do the review for that next Monday. That'll be me done with the first two books, two series in the Razor line. That'll be Hyperkind and Hokum and Hex. Speaking of the Hyperkind, there is a continuance of the attempt to combine or connect these two books in the last 4 issues, where they feature members of the Shining Path, which I suppose we could call a cult, but is really more of archiving society or a conspiracy group, in that they're trying to prove that the Paxis, the Hyperkind, the old superheroes, actually did exist. And I believe it's the Long Island chapter that they show us as they're being wiped out by the bounty hunter that went after Trip earlier in the series. The writing in this story, which spans 4 issues, it's not great. It's a decent arc. There is decent character development for Trip, although I think it comes far too little, far too late. It's very clear from the way the writing was done, with all the cramming of detail that's kind of smushed into this, that let's not have the corporate logo of another of a cereal company in here, but the story is jam-packed, or the 4 issues rather are jam-packed with details and storyline plot points, to the point that it becomes somewhat of a flood of information, a bit of an overwhelming hyper stimulus, if you will, since, you know, whoever wrote this book likes the word hyper so much, and doesn't understand the difference between one's mind and cyberspace. Yeah, there's one point where Trip and Gorkill, the original soldier sent to kill him, end up mostly dead. I think somebody was watching the Princess Bride a bit. But they end up mostly dead, and they end up in this place called the Neurosphere, which is a cyberspace of your hyper mind. Like, really? I understand why I stopped buying comics about the time this came out, because the quality had taken up. Complete nosedive. Even the art is not as good as it was. Some panels are absolutely glorious and beautiful. Some of the stuff that's presented is, at best, poorly drawn. I don't know. I have the feeling that it's not the same artist. If it was, he was definitely, or they were definitely, under a massive time crunch. They were basically told, you have to finish these 4 books in a month, kind of thing, I expect. And being that I'm under something of a time crunch now, I understand how quality can go down. Unfortunately. There are, again, a pile of unresolved stories and plot points that just faded into the background. The character Solon Ray, the old man who turns out to be Trip's BBEG's only son, gets abducted back to his home, I assume to face execution. I also assume that at some point it was intended that Trip would actually go and rescue him. It kind of seems to be likely. The character of Bloodshed had some connection to Trip's mother. We are, again, left to assume that he killed Trip's mother. Well, not 100% left to assume it. It's basically told to us. But the circumstances and how exactly it happened are kind of left up in the air. Or at least as far as I can remember from the massive flood of information I tried to wade through, it's left up in the air. Mona Lisa's condition, Trip's best friend's condition, at the end of the story, she's still in a coma. Apparently going to be saved because Gorkill's change of heart actually did help. Though, really, it kind of went a distance to making the Corpy, the bad guys, a little more sympathetic, which, really, sympathetic villains? Isn't that a little early? One of the things I did like, and I do have to talk about something I did like, because if I don't, well, what's the point of doing this? But one of the things I did like, and one of the things that used to be one of the great aspects of comics, there is a very, very high-level discussion in comic book language, though some of the terminology is, I would say, advanced reading level, of whether or not determinism versus free will is correct. One of the things I loved about that was they're in the middle of this pitched physical battle, and yet they're having an ideological debate at the same time. That's good comic book writing. And it occurs in the earliest of the issues, which I assume was the one that was written with the least pressure. And hopefully completed with the least pressure. But, yeah, it's still not great. Again, I'm suffering an absolute destruction of my nostalgia, which really kind of fills me with a bit of trepidation for Ecto Kid and Saint Sinner. In considering those titles earlier today, one thing that did occur to me is Marvel created the Razor line with Clive Barker about the same time, if I recall correctly, that Hellblazer and Sandman, Neil Gaiman's pieces, DC's horror lines, were having great success. So perhaps it was a response to that, in which case it was rushed, forced, and kind of the early mirror of how DC did their cinematic universe. Rushed and forced. Not learning the lessons that others have learned. But yeah, I don't wish to devote more than, say, 12 minutes to this, and I'm coming up on 10 now. My feeling is that had the writers and the artists had a bit more time been told, look, take your time, finish the book. You've got 4 issues to tell the full story. Maybe then they'd have trimmed out some of the fat. Maybe they'd have left it on a decent cliffhanger as opposed to trying to tie everything up and present it in a nice little bow, which they clearly did. Yeah, the threads that weren't properly fleshed out are glaringly obvious. The ones that were finished were tied up a little too neatly with some Deus Ex Machinas. Well, not really a Deus Ex Machina, but some strange things happen. Yeah. There's some wonderfully odd visuals that occur, though. And those probably come directly from Barker. Or someone who had a feel for his style. Some of the stuff with Godkin Straith, the being that empowered Trip, that was interesting. He's in a very political sort of shadow war of sorts with Felon Bale. So those aspects were kind of interesting. But they're kind of interesting to me now. When I was 16, 18 reading this, no. And I will say that the colors, the action style, the way the action is presented, all of that was incredibly good. That was classic, good comic book work. Unfortunately, it's wrapped up in a bundle of shit. There's not really much of a recommendation I can give it. If you happen to come across a copy of it, if you get it free, if you're bored on a Friday night, have a read. But there's a lot of proto-woke. There's a lot of the authors injecting their own politics, and I do realize I'm over 12 minutes. But this is one of the big faults of the book, or the books. There's a lot of injection of personal politics, to the point where the same character calls people liberal wimps, and yet acts in an extremely progressive manner. And is a very progressive character, as it's a female bounty hunter. Yeah, very, very strange. Anyway, I'm at 13 minutes, and I've had more than enough of this. So yeah, the Discordant Dragons tonight, Subscribestar, PayPal, you can find me on Getter, Gab, Truth Social, which is new. I have a friend who does a Twitter for me. Sultans of Shadilay's 100th episode is coming up on Saturday. We're doing a drunk stream. Please stand by for that. Discordant Dragons tonight. Christopher Everard will be running his Hunter the Reckoning campaign on Thursday. Keep an eye out for that. Wednesday, I will be doing a reading for this last short story in the Hokum and Hex saga. I don't expect it to really clue anything up. Hopefully it might. I suspect it's probably just an episode, so it might be a good read on its own. I don't know. Frank, I think the pronunciation is Loveci, or Loviki. Lovece, excuse me, is the name of the author of it. So it's a name I recognize, and I believe I recognize it from a Star Wars book. Possibly one of the Darth Maul books. And if I recall correctly, not a bad book. So it may be a good story. In any case, as I said, I'll do the reading for Wednesday. The review of that will be next Monday. And after that, then I'll be on to Ecto Kid and Saint Sinner. Saint Sinner will be the last one I do, barring crossovers. If there's a crossover, then I will go to the point of the crossover in Ecto Kid and read then the Saint Sinner books to get up to that crossover, do the crossover, go back and do it the same format that I did with the Hyperkind and Hokum and Hex. Finish the Hyperkind, finish Hokum and Hex. So it'll be finish Ecto Kid, finish Saint Center. But I will be starting with Ecto Kid next. And Ecto Kid kind of strikes me now, which may be wrong, as the most comic book of the comic book ones. Though, come to think of it, I felt that way about Hyperkind. So, we'll see. Anyway, guys, I hope you're having a good day. I hope you continue to have good days. And as always, rise and rise again until lambs become lions. Bye-bye.